Section 414. I will probably split this section into different videos because it's quite long. Comment on the two attitudes towards the borrowing of loanwords, and you will have to consider the following aspects. Which solutions did the different scholars give? Explain Mulcaster's attitude and what is an Incoterm, and give examples. There's going to be a debate over vocabulary, and there are going to be different attitudes towards the enrichment of English, because we know that now English has to be enriched to be this fully fledged language. So it's the universal acceptance of English as a scholarly language did not mean that English was complacently regarded as a perfect vehicle or was taken for granted for second thoughts. One might call the entire early modern English period is called the age of linguistic variety. Once the inevitability of its universal use has been at least recognized, there were disputes about its deficiencies and its purity. And the first thing that it was inadequate for most scholars was the lexicon. And the idea that the word stock of English wasn't sufficient to express economically and elegantly the ideas that they wanted to convey. Those scholars that they've been inflamed by the Renaissance, so it wasn't good enough, you could say. This rapid increase in the lexicon and the sources of the new words were commented by many writers, and you will get for this period you will get many writings dealing with the nature of English. English is good, it's not good, the lexicon that writers should be using. So you will find lots of books about that. And you've got a very nice quotation on page 43 by Wilkins talking about this idea, and it would be a good idea if you read that quotation at home. Borrowing was the easiest way to enrich the language, the most obvious way to fill the gaps in vocabulary. And Latin is going to be obviously the easiest language to borrow from. It's the most obvious language to borrow from. The difference between these new borrowings compared to other borrowings from other periods, that you know that English has been borrowing. I hope that you remember that it's been borrowing since it came into England, into the British Isles. There are differences, as I said, in early modern English in these borrowings. First, the great majority of the loans, they come from Latin and not from other vernacular. The big bulk, that's the first thing. The second difference is the quantity. Remember that in Middle English it was 10,000 more or less. Well, during early modern English, this number was outnumbered by the Latin loans. So it's incredible, the amount. The third difference is that for the first time in the history of English, the borrowing was conscious. It was done by a specific individual who deliberately were just introducing the words to improve the language. And the the fourth difference is that the bulk of loanwords were, at least initially, they were learned in nature. Eran palabras cultas. Thousands of them were later incorporated into everyday language and general language, but in nature they were learned. So these are the four differences. And as you can imagine, writers are going to have different attitudes towards the incorporation of these loanwords. There were conscious borrowers, like for example Thomas Eliot, and but most of the times when he was introducing Latinism, he was explaining that to the general reader. So you have writers that consciously they explained the meaning of them. Sometimes even Sir Thomas Eliot, who was very conscious borrower, sometimes he just included words, borrowings, and he didn't explain the meaning of them. But you get that those writers that were just conscious borrowers. Most of them weren't that responsible, and many writers used unfamiliar terms just because they wanted to show off their learning. But in fact, the average reader did not really understand the meaning of most of them. Remember that those Latinisms that call it a Latin, obviously Latin, a Romance root, and Anglo-Saxon is a Germanic language in origin. Now this practice of borrowing was called inkhornism. It comes from the word inkhorn, which is a portable bottle. In Spanish, that's a good word for those learning Spanish. Un tintero, for holding ink. So when you write down the word, the smell of ink. In Spanish, a good translation would be cultismos. And in the Baroque, during the Baroque period in Spain, we also have that many Latinismos, cultismos, were incorporated also into Spanish. More or less the same time. So, and translations also played a quite important role because to integrate language, because we have all those classical writings, and the writers, the English writers, were translating those classical writings, and so they just incorporated the Latinisms, the Latin words into their translations. But we could say that there is a quite ambivalent attitude as regards borrowings. That is to say, you have people that they didn't like it that much, but they knew they had to use it, like Sir Thomas Eliot, that they would use. So there was quite ambivalent, which is more or less the quotation you got at the end of page 44 by Hobby. And there are many reasons given to justify the introduction of new loanwords. Most frequently, it was claimed that lexical gaps and insufficient differentiation in the existing vocabulary made the new words indispensable, because the Romans, they also had to borrow from the Greek, so it was like a normal thing to do. Then the strangeness of new words would soon be lost with frequent use. They were using it a lot, and so people just got used to that. To this idea of introducing many words, scholars call it copiousness, or copia verborum, which is, as I said, to try to introduce many Latinisms, and this is going to be quite noticeable in the 16th century. And the copia verborum is just relies on large numbers of synonyms or partial synonyms, which could easily be supplied by loans from French and Latin. I'll stop here for the second section. Thank you.